Welcome to another episode of the Shephard Defense Podcast. Today I am sitting down with Matty Todhunter, Senior UAV Analyst at Shephard's Defense Insight. We're going to discuss the most important developments of the UAV market in 2024, looking back over the year in review, and maybe making some predictions for 2025. While we often bring you episodes created in collaboration with our commercial partners, this one is a little different. It's completely free from ads or sponsorship. Instead, this episode is brought to you in partnership with Shephard's very own Defense Insight service, our leading defense market data platform. Matty, it's a pleasure to have you here. How are things going over at Defense Insight?
Thanks very much, Jack. It's a pleasure to be here. Going very well over at Defense Insight at the minute. Very busy time. Yeah, it's quite an exciting period.
So, Matty, to get started, obviously the world is a more dangerous place. There are more conflicts happening across the globe. Looking specifically at Ukraine, you see a lot of UAV footage and FPV drone footage and so on. How has the Ukraine war affected the market?
I think fundamentally it's kind of turbocharged the market and really changed it quite significantly and kind of expedited a lot of programs kind of more higher up in terms of priority. So I think it's kind of done that kind of directly and indirectly. So I think directly, obviously, there's been a lot of drone procurement programs related specifically to Ukraine, with a lot of NATO allies buying a lot of equipment for Ukraine, particularly through the International Drone Coalition. I think they've kind of said that they want to spend well over £1 billion before the end of the year on drones for Ukraine. And obviously, Ukraine has bought a lot of drones for itself as well. So I think from that kind of sense, very directly, it really has kind of turbocharged the drone market. Also as well, a lot of countries surrounding Ukraine and kind of bordering Russia particularly, that conflict has also kind of advanced the drone programs that they've got going for themselves. So I think a kind of a good example of that is Poland, who following Russia's invasion, instantly kind of looked into procuring the MQ-9A Reaper from General Atomics. That turned into a lease agreement before they could, as a bridging solution, before they could get the MQ-9B, which is something they announced a contract award for just a few weeks ago, which is a contract of well over 300 million. So I think kind of directly it has had quite a mass effect on the kind of the drone market and really turbocharged it. I think indirectly as well, it's also kind of affected the market quite significantly, as kind of the conflict has highlighted the importance of drone in kind of modern symmetrical conflict or near symmetrical conflict as well. And I think a kind of good example of that would be that France, in its announcement of its twin procurement contracts for loitering munitions, its LARNA and its Calabria effort, cited Russia's invasion and the importance of drones in that as well. So I think kind of indirectly and directly, it has kind of really contributed to a turbocharging of the drone market.
Interesting. So you see a lot of commercial drones being used in warfare. Is there a crossover between the civilian, commercial and the military markets?
Definitely at the minute, and definitely with Ukraine, as you said. Ever since that conflict started, there's been a lot of charity efforts and kind of efforts from the Ukrainian government and military for people to donate household, civilian, commercial off-the-shelf drones. Any small rotary wing craft can essentially act as an immediate ISR drone or even be mounted with a kind of an explosive charge and be a quite rudimentary loitering munition as well. So yeah, there definitely is a lot of crossover between the civilian and kind of military drones in that sense, yeah.
Interesting. So what battlefield roles are we seeing drones occupy these days?
Fundamentally, we're kind of seeing drones in a really wide variety of roles on the battlefield, and kind of, they're not taking over, but they're definitely kind of using it, or kind of turning into a lot of roles that historically be done by crewed aircraft. So for instance, instead of using kind of a crewed fixed wing aircraft, you can now use a drone as a loyal wingman to augment fighters and kind of augment a kind of fighter formation through that. You could also use drones for, and people are using them for long-range ISR, which is again something that would be conventionally done by a crewed aircraft, and even strike roles as well. In terms of rotary wing platforms, they can also do quite a lot of the roles that helicopters have traditionally done. So particularly in kind of ship-to-ship movement of cargo and ship-to-shore movement of cargo, there's a lot of movement now and a lot of programs that are kind of moving towards seeing if drones can do that in a more cost-effective and manpower-efficient way than a helicopter can. I think the US Navy has one of the biggest programs, which is kind of one of the key programs that kind of driving that as well. A lot of drones are also being used to, instead of traditional infantry equipment as well. So instead of perhaps using a mortar or kind of an immediate kind of strike capability like that for the infantry, you can use a loitering munition, you can use an FPV drone with a charge on it, or something like that, which gives kind of infantry units a more immediate strike capability as well. So yeah, fundamentally, I think drones are being used for lots of capabilities and are really being used in a variety of roles.
So you mentioned loyal wingman programs. Are there any we should be keeping our eyes on? Are there any that are active at the moment?
So definitely the forerunner in the loyal wingman programs is the kind of the US Air Force Collaborative Combat Aircraft, or the CCA. That's kind of one of the first major ones to really be advanced, and it's one of the first major ones to reach kind of a high level of maturity. A lot of the key players in the industry are involved in that program, including people like General Atomics, Anduril, and other big companies like that. So if there's any low wingman program to watch out, it's definitely that one. And that program has a sister as well in the US Navy to do similar things, but obviously with a slight more maritime slant on it as well.
When can we expect to see them being used?
I think in terms of the CCA, the two companies have been tasked with producing production representative aircraft that I think are looking to be able to fly or at least be tested in around 2025 or 2026. But in terms of being used kind of in the field, I don't think low wingman programs will be seeing the full results of them until the 2030s.
Okay. All right. We'll keep our eyes on them then. So you mentioned a lot of different roles that drones are playing on the modern battlefield. And obviously new roles are being discovered all the time, but are there any key important lessons learned that are coming out of the modern conflicts?
I think one of the big kind of lessons learned seems to be that there seems to be a drive towards drones being low cost and more on the disposable side than when they first entered the kind of the market and were used on the battlefields as well. I think Ukraine, as we kind of touched on before, has been kind of a driver of that. I think the need for drones to be disposable and low cost to produce and produced in mass as well seems to be quite an important thing that is kind of a more recent development in the drone market, shall we say. And that ranges all the way from small FPV drones that cost around $100 to $200 each to multi-million loyal wingman drones. They still need to be low cost and kind of disposable if necessary, which I think is kind of been one of the key kind of drivers of the change in the drone market as well.
That's a really interesting point. I've always been of the mind that the Western equipment is rather exotic, very expensive, and there's not very much of it. But do you see them taking on the lesson that mass really matters?
Yeah, definitely. I think kind of one of the key highlights of that would be in mid-2023, the US DoD announced the Replicator 1 program, which was a program specifically to field thousands of disposable, low-cost, kind of attributable platforms, and thousands of them in order to better compete with China in terms of just raw mass of kind of UAVs and things like that. So yeah, I think that lesson has definitely been learned and is being impacted on by the major NATO nations.
Excellent. So what have been the most exciting moments in the year, in your opinion?
I think there's kind of two for me that stand out. As someone who's been kind of covering the drone industry for around 4 years, the announcement of the contract award for India's procurement of 31 MQ-9B drones from General Atomics is quite an exciting moment for me. It's kind of a program I've been reading about and writing about for 4 years. Just to see it eventually have that contract be signed and kind of fully in motion, it was quite exciting. And especially because in terms of value as well, it was one of the most valuable awarded contracts of the year. So I think that was quite an exciting moment for me to kind of finally write about that in terms of a contract award. And another one, as I've kind of previously mentioned, is that American Replicator effort. And kind of in contrast to the Indian program, just the speed that has been announced. And we've already had 2 batches of contract awards for that. One in May for the Switchblade 600, and then another one, I think, in November for a selection of 3 different platforms. I think it's kind of quite exciting that something can be announced and fielded kind of so quickly as well.
So on the topic of the Indian program award, are they going to be produced indigenously, or are they being bought directly from the States?
I think to qualify for the Made in India initiative, there is definitely a level of indigenous production. I can't quite remember what level that is. I'll be honest.
Yeah, no problem. All right, I won't quiz you on. All right, so this is the difficult bit. It's very hard to look into the future, especially these days. You know, you buy a newspaper and it's out of date after one day, right? So do you have any predictions as an expert for where the market's going to go next year?
I think in terms of kind of things we've already discussed as well, I think one of the kind of fertile grounds for the market next year will be the kind of advancement of early stages of major European nations kind of embarking on loyal wingman programs. We've already seen kind of the very early green shoots of this. Obviously, the Americans are kind of leading the way with the CCC effort for the US Air Force and the Navy, but also there's kind of symbols of that's coming to the Europe as well. For instance, Airbus released its wingman prototype in the Berlin in the middle of the year, kind of aimed at Germany's expressed interest for a loyal wingman program, but there's been no real kind of announcement of what that would look like. And I think kind of next year there'll be more like a mature expression of what those ideas are and what those requirements are for that program as well. And kind of even more recently as well, I think the French Minister of the Armed Forces announced in October that Dassault Aviation would be kind of producing a loyal wingman for the French Armed Forces for their future 6th generation fighter to work alongside that. Again, kind of very early stages, but I think kind of going forward to 2025, those programs will kind of mature more and there'll be more information around them, which would be an exciting thing for the market, I think.
Okay. So what do you look for when you go to a trade show? What really piques your interest?
Generally for me, at a trade show, one of the most exciting things is seeing drones there and kind of the mock-ups of them, especially if they're full scale. I think that's always quite exciting to get a real kind of scale of them, especially kind of the male platforms and the kind of the hail platforms as well, any of the large ones. Also, it's just kind of, for me, one of the exciting things is seeing a drone that I haven't wrote about and I don't know too much about. So I'm always quite interested to kind of see what that company's offering and to see how that drone might differ from the other things that already exist in the industry. So I think for me, those are the kind of quite exciting things about going to trade shows, especially kind of the further away from the UK they are, the kind of the more interesting things that are kind of out there for me. So that's always quite exciting.
Are there any trade shows we should be going to in the new year?
Well, I'm going to IDEX, so hopefully that'll be a good one. I'm sure it will be. Other than that, I'm not too sure.
I think when I was at IDEX, last IDEX, I saw a Baykar stand right next to the Russia stand, which was just remarkable. You know, this is right at the beginning of the war when the Bayraktar was doing all of its work. It was pretty crazy to see. So what technologies should we be keeping an eye on?
So I think in terms of technology, kind of relating it back to kind of loyal wingmans again and kind of a higher end platform, shall we say, I think kind of one of the really emerging kind of part of the drone industry at the minute is kind of autonomous control systems and autonomy in general. Especially that's kind of a key cornerstone of how a lot of these loyal wingman programs will inevitably function when they get put into service. I think that's definitely kind of a part of the industry that's advancing quite quickly. I think, for instance, OpenAI announced that they were having a strategic collaboration with Anduril. I think that was announced a few weeks ago. And since Anduril is kind of one of the key players in that USF or CCA program. I think that's kind of definitely something to kind of keep an eye on over the next few years, definitely.
That's absolutely fascinating. That's going to be an interesting one to keep an eye on.
Yeah.
Okay. Excellent. All right. Well, Matty, thank you very much for your time. I know it's a busy time of year. How are things going at Defence Insight just before we leave?
Thank you very much, Jack. They're going really well. I'm very busy kind of on the run up to the Christmas period. But yeah, going very well. A lot of new exciting things coming.
Good to hear it. Awesome. All right. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.